Hello everyone and welcome back to one of our training sessions. Today we're going to be revisiting one of our previous workflows, which is the cold email campaign with verifier, cold outreach campaign, because this is a very helpful workflow and it contains some concepts that are always worth revisiting from time to time. For some of you who might remember what this workflow is about, basically there are two things. First is that we're able to verify a list of email addresses to make sure that they are valid. Like just making sure that the structure of the email address itself is correct, that it's not an spam or fake account. So that's the first step. We're gonna clean a list of email addresses to make sure they are valid using the email verifier node right here. But also after verifying that list of email addresses, we're gonna make use of it and how we are gonna be sending emails. This is very helpful for a cold email campaign where we are trying to get leads or potential clients to reach back to us. So we do have this workbook with 4 subflows and we're gonna be covering one by one. Also, we're gonna be talking in detail about each one of the steps or notes in the whole workbook. So the first one, like the main flow, basically what it does is that we are automating a cold outreach campaign where we are verifying the email addresses first, then we are going to send an initial message, and every day we're going to check in our mailbox if that email address has sent a new message to us, basically if they have replied. Because if they have replied, we want to stop the campaign for them. It wouldn't make sense, right? If I send an initial email introducing myself and maybe proposing that we have a discussion or a conversation, and they said, yes, of course, we don't want to send an email the next day saying, hey, what do you think about it? So if they reply, we're going to stop. We're going to change the stuff in our database. In this case, it's going to be a Google spreadsheet. We want to stop that. And then what happens if we have the other scenario where they don't reply? We're going to establish a maximum attempt value, and we're going to try as many times. Like for example, if we set it to 3, we're going to try 3 different days until we reach the limit, and then we're going to stop even if they don't reply, because we have set that limit precisely to avoid going on forever. Okay, so we do have to check some preconditions before we execute the flow. So the first thing is that we need to make sure that our Gmail account is connected. Okay, so I'm just gonna make myself a bit smaller. And now we do have 2 instances of the Gmail node. So the first one is on the subflow number 1, verify and send the first email, and it's right here. We can see it. After we have used the email verifier, then if the email is okay or is valid, we are gonna send the first email. So you click here, make sure that your email is connected to this module. And this is a very good moment to also modify the template if you want to send something different. This is just a placeholder, a very basic and generic template where we are saying, hi, I hope your week's going well. I came across your company and I wanted to reach out to discuss topic. This is something that you need to replace with you. Would you be open to a quick 15 minutes chat this week to see if it makes sense to explore further? And then your name. So again, you can modify the whole template, and even you could use a combined text module if you want to programmatically or automatically replace these variables. You can also do that. Right now, we are not focusing on that part, so we are just using the template as it is. Okay. Then the other instance of Gmail that we are using is on the 4th subflow, which is the send email subflow. And this is the most simple subflow in our workbook because we are just passing an email, sending a message, and then making sure that it is successful. And we're using this for the subsequent follow-ups. Like after the initial contact, then every time we send an email, we are going to be using this subflow right here. And we need to also make sure that our mailbox is properly connected and that we have edited the template. On this one, we are saying hi, just checking in to see if you had a chance to read my last email. I will still love to connect about whatever topic you want to discuss. And just explaining that even a quick yes, no, or later will help me know how to follow up appropriately. Because what we want is just to get a response from them to stop the campaign, right? So it can be something as simple as this. Then we wrap up the email saying thanks again and your name, okay? So going back to the first top flow, then we have more preconditions that we need to check. And the second one is link the sheet node to your Google Sheet with these specific columns. If you are using this template for the first time, it's very likely that you are going to see that there is a sheet already connected to the flow, but you need to create your own copy, right? And let me show you how this Google Sheet works or how it looks. Basically, we have the email column. This is our first column where we're going to be putting the whole list of addresses that we want to check. We do have the verifier, and this can be empty. I'm going to actually delete all of this. The only thing we actually need the first time we run it is the email address list. Now, the rest of the columns are going to be filled automatically when we execute the flow. The verifier, it's going to pretty much say okay or invalid. We do have some invalid examples right here. So again, just leave this one empty, and then the flow is going to complete that for us. Attempts. Basically, we're going to be tracking here how many times we have tried to contact each email address. So after the initial contact, automatically this is going to be updated to 1 if it was valid, or it will stay blank if it was not valid email because we didn't try anything, right? The max attempts, we're going to see that in a moment, but that is a value that is going to be hard-coded for all of the rows, and we're going to set that using the interface, okay? Then we have a reply. In this column, we are simply using a Boolean, false if they haven't replied yet. It's going to change to true if they have replied, which is going to also affect the status, and we are going to have 3 statuses on this spreadsheet. You can have as many statuses as you want, but at least you need these 3 because in progress, it's gonna represent those rows that are currently being contacted every day after the initial email. Then stopped and completed might be a bit confusing, but here the idea is that we want to know what was the outcome of the campaign. So we are using stopped specifically when we reach the limit and we did not get a response. We just stopped the campaign unsuccessfully, but completed means that they have reached out to us. They replied, then we are also stopping the campaign, but this was a positive outcome. So we are using completed instead. Okay. So once you create your own copy of the spreadsheet and you connect it here, you actually have to connect that in a few places. You have to connect that on each Google Sheet node. So we have this Google Sheet reader in the first softflow, and then we have updaters depend on the outcomes. We're gonna see that in a moment as well, but just keep in mind that you need to make sure that all of these Google Sheet nodes are connected with the proper credentials and to the proper sheet. On the second one, we also have a couple of Google Sheets nodes, and on the follow-up, we also have 1 reader and 2 updaters depending on the outcomes. Okay, now going back to the preconditions, only the email column must be filled initially. The workflow completes the rest automatically. As I mentioned before, this is exactly how it should look on your end because everything else is going to be filled automatically. Set a default max attempts. Okay, actually, we can do this by editing this interface right here. So if I click on the interface form, I could say 3, 4, 5, or whatever number I want for the max attempts. So that's going to become my default every time I try to run it. But again, you can also change the value for each specific execution. I wouldn't recommend more than 5 attempts, right? Because that could affect deliverability. And we don't want to affect our mailbox or being marked as a spam or anything like that. So probably between 3 or 4, it's a very good number. And I think that's it for the preconditions. We have covered all of them. And then we need to modify the template. This is something we already discussed a few minutes ago. Make sure that when you connect your mailbox to the Gmail sender or reader notes along the workbook, you need to also modify the templates. Okay. Now, how do we execute this flow? Well, we have to go to the main workflow, the first subflow in this case, which is the verified and sent first email, and then you have to click run. This is going to ask you how many attempts do you want for this execution. We're going to leave it at 3 and then click submit and run flow. Then the second step of this workflow is actually automated, because the second subflow, it's going to be triggered automatically every day. And this is the one that will check if there has been new responses. Actually, this one doesn't have a trigger right now, but the idea is that we can change that by creating a, let me see, a trigger that is a timer trigger. We can add this here and make sure that this is running every day. For the purpose of the demonstration, I'm just running it manually. But the idea, or this has been designed with this in mind, that the second workflow is going to be triggered automatically every day. And what that's going to do is calculate yesterday. So from right now, 24 hours in the past, I want to see if in that period of time we got new replies. All right. For now, let me go ahead and remove this. And then we have a conditional logic where if a reply was found, then we want to set reply column to true and status to completed. But if not, then we are going to move on to the next subflow, which is the follow-ups. And then we're going to keep sending messages every day until we get the max attempts limit, or we reach the max attempts limit. Some tips: only the verified contacts are going to be emailed. So if by any chance you notice that one of the addresses has not been contacted for some reason, go back to the spreadsheet and check what is the status of the verifier, because most likely that one's going to be invalid, or it's going to be a status different to okay. Do not rename columns. You can definitely rename columns if you want, but that means that you need to make sure that the mapping is correct. So if you want to use this template as it is, just leave the column names unchanged, because it's gonna be a lot easier just to start using the template right away without having to double check other configurations. If Gmail sending within safe daily limits, this is also related to what I was saying before. Try to use a small amount of attempts. Also, try to make the list of email addresses, make it reasonable. If you actually want to have a very large amount of email, it might be a good idea to put that in small batches or use different mailboxes to contact different groups of people. Now, another brief explanation of the subflows. I think we have covered that already, but we do have 4 subflows. We have the verified and send first email, then we're watching for new replies, and then we have the follow-ups. The fourth one is more like a function used to send emails that we are invoking on the third one. Okay, now let's go back. I know this might be a lot, but let's try to cover this step by step. So first, we have the interface, right? So the interface works like our starting point, like an input. So every time we try to run it, this is going to ask us this value, because that's how we have set the interface. But let's try to see this in depth. If I try to edit this, you can see that I have a bunch of options. My interface by adding an upload a profile image, kind of. It's more like an icon to identify my interface. Also, I have a banner or header. This is maybe if you want to brand it, that's a very helpful way of making it custom. But we do have, and this is more importantly, we do have very different types of data that we can include in our form. So I could add a drop down, and here I can select the options. If I click on the settings icon, then I can define my options, a default value, helper text. Helper text is super useful when you are creating a workflow. If there are time constraints or you are trying to make everything fast, you might forget to add some notes for yourself or some helper text here and there, just so it's easier for you to go back and maintain the automation in the future. But if you have time to do it, I will definitely recommend add text like this one, either for the end user or for yourself, because it's a lot easier going back to a workflow with notes so you quickly understand what was happening. It's always a best practice. So here, for example, I have added a helper text saying enter a number from 1 to 5 to set the maximum attempts to contact each email. The cap of 5 helps prevent mailbox blacklisting, right? So I immediately recognize what this field was for thanks to the helper text. I can also define the default value and a minimum and a maximum. And we can do that with different types of data, checkbox, email, date, number, or even attachments. And you can also have like additional elements. These are not for inputs, but just to have text or dividers or headings, to make it more visually pleasing and have a more defined structure. So yeah, let's continue with the next step, which also happens right after we complete the we trigger the execution, which is getting the list of emails. Now, these have a filter, so this is very important to understand what we are actually getting. We are getting a list of emails where the attempts is empty and the status is also empty. That's, we are just double checking, right? Because in theory, if the status is empty, attempts should also be empty, vice versa. But just to make sure that we are not getting any email address that is currently being processed. And I'm going to explain that in a moment as well. Now, what does this mean? We're going to go back to the table to see we do have a list of emails. They all have empty attempts and they all have empty statuses. So the first time I run this is actually going to consider all of the emails. And that's exactly what we want. Let's say you have 10 email addresses and you run it the first time and some of them are invalid, some of them are valid. So we are contacting them. We're going to have a few of these emails with one attempt and in progress. But let's say I want to add 10 more and I don't want to trigger it once again and send another initial email to the people that I already contacted the first time. So that's going to help us. This filter is going to make sure that if we trigger it again, we're only considering those email addresses that haven't been processed before. Okay. Now, remember that our first step actually after getting the list of emails is verifying those emails. So this is why we need the email verifier node, which is wrapped inside an if else because we do have different outcomes. It could be valid or invalid. So I'm going to try to execute this right now. Max attempts 3 by default, submit and run the flow. And let's see how this behaves. So we are getting the list of emails. Okay, that's perfect. And then we're passing that output through the email verifier. And we are going to see how we do have two outcomes. Like we have false for some, but we also have true for other records. Okay, let's see here how it actually looks after it has updated the Google Sheet. So we have our email address. Some of them are okay. They have one attempt because we send the initial email. We set the max attempts for all the records because it is hard-coded. And then we have these 4 okay email addresses in progress. So these other 3 emails are invalid and we don't want to contact them. But let's say that this wasn't an obviously invalid email like this one, but it was something that only had a typo or something like that. Well, let's see what happens if we fix the row and then we trigger this again. Now I'm gonna add a valid email. I'm gonna use actually a trick in Gmail to act like I have another email address, which is gonna be plus test and then the domain. So again, this is actually the same email address, but it's gonna be treated as an alias, so it should work. I'm gonna clear the verifier status and I'm gonna leave the max attempts as it is. So I'm gonna try again. What happens if I run this one more time? Well, what I would expect to happen is that this is gonna ignore the ones that are in progress, and then it's gonna check only the ones that are still blank. And it actually did, as you can see, because my new alias was verified, it's okay, and then it was contacted initially, and then it's also in the in progress status. So the idea is precisely that we only want to, every time we run it, we only want to check for those that are not in progress. Okay. So yeah, we are definitely sending the initial email to all of the valid ones, and then we have these two inputs just to define what's the status that we want to use after the sending the email, which is in progress, and then the other one is the minimum attempts, which is always gonna be one for our initial contact. And then we simply update the Google Sheet. That's when the email is okay or is valid. If we have a different result, then it's gonna go through this second path where it's simply updating, correcting the status, or this column right here. Okay, so now that we have sent the initial email, what's gonna happen, let's say tomorrow, once our second subflow is triggered? Well, what's gonna happen is that, let's say tomorrow morning, this is gonna run, and it's gonna get the list of emails again, but this time we do have a filter that will only check the rows where the attempts is not empty. So it's kind of the opposite of the first one. Attempts is not empty, and the status equals in progress. So in this case, we are actually getting these 5 addresses. Okay, and after getting that, we are also checking the yesterday value. And how this works is that this is gonna get the time now, and it's gonna subtract 1 day, and it will give me that value, because I can use these two things, like the emails and the yesterday timestamp, to build a query. So my query is gonna look like this: from the email address after the yesterday timestamp in my inbox. And I'm gonna use this query that I have built using the combined text to pass it through the Gmail reader. And I'm basically saying, hey, in this mailbox that is connected here, I want to check if we have emails matching this query. And what does that mean if we do have a match? Well, it means that in the last 24 hours, we get an email from one of the addresses that we contacted yesterday. So that means we got a reply. It doesn't matter what was the reply, what was the content of that message. We just want to stop because they either said they don't want to be contacted again, or they said that it's okay for us to schedule a meeting, so we don't have to keep trying, right? We can just move on to the next stage of the process. Now we do have 2 scenarios right here. It's where there is a match, because if there is not match, you can see that that edge is empty, so we are not doing anything. But if there is a match, then we want to do 2 things. We want to set a new status, which is here, completed, and then we want to set the reply column to true. After taking those 2 values, we update the Google Sheet, and then we continue with the third flow, which is where we are following up with those that are not stopped yet or not completed yet. Okay, now this time, if I run it, nothing is gonna happen because no one has replied. So it should stop. Oh, actually my bad, because probably it's taking replies from my previous test on this execution. But on a real scenario, it should not go through because they haven't replied yet. If they have replied yet, then this is gonna happen, right? This is gonna be set to true and completed, and then this person is not gonna be contacted again. This was just because I probably have one email from this mailbox to this one that is connected here, which is this one, Operation Oppz. So because I probably have an email from that address in the last 24 hours, then it's thinking that I got a reply. Again, this is just because of my previous test before the demo, so don't worry about that. I actually like that we got one example of a reply here. So what's going to happen once we move on to the follow-ups? Well, we are getting the list one more time, but only if the status equals in progress. So now we are ignoring the completed one. We have 4 in progress email addresses. So we are gonna invoke the send email softflow, which is this one. Again, we don't need to cover a lot here because we are just passing an email, sending an email, and verifying that it is successful. And you might wonder, why do we have these two inputs here if we are not actually using it? We are just passing it through. Well, because if you can see here, we do want to use those fields later in the softflow. So if we don't pass them through this invocation or this softflow call, then they will get lost at this point, right? And we are not going to be able to access those two values, let's say here or here, like in subsequent steps, we won't be able to access them. So if you use logic like this, where you are invoking another softflow, but you still want to access some parameters or some values from the previous steps, then this is how you do it. You do whatever you have to do in the softflow, which is this part right here, and then you pass the other values through. So you just need an input and an output. This way, I will be able to access those two values in the next node. Okay. So once again, I get the list of in progress emails, email address. I filter if the email was successful. Now, because I passed those values through, I can access the attempts and the max attempts in this node. And then depending on the condition, like if success equals true, then I want to move on to the next one. If it is not true, then I don't want to do anything, right? I want to stop the flow. Now, this is where it becomes a bit interesting because we need a way to track our attempts, right? So we are using a mathematics node to do that. And we are actually calculating two values here. We have the completed attempts, which is going to be my previous number of attempts, in this case is 1, plus my incremental value, which is going to be 1. So that means that every time we run it, and every time we send a follow-up, we're incrementing my attempts by 1 until we reach the max attempts, okay? And we also want to track how many attempts I have left. And to do that, I'm just taking the max attempts, which is 3 in this case, and subtracting the completed attempts, which right now is 1, but it's going to be 2 after I run it. And my remaining attempts is going to be 1. So basically, I want to filter. If my remaining attempts are 0, then I want to stop, right? So we do have two scenarios right here after the filter. We have to keep the in progress status when we still have remaining attempts. But if the remaining attempts is 0, then we need to stop. And now let's try this one time. Right now, we do have 5 email addresses with 1 attempt. This should be updated to 2, which means that they all should stay in progress. Sorry, that's 4, not 5. Okay. So let's see what's happening. We're sending the emails. Okay. And what we are getting here again is the list of emails where we do have the status in progress. Let's see how many. Let's refresh this. Okay, so we have 4 outputs. We have this with 1 attempt, this with 1 attempt, 1 attempt, an attempt. Okay, that's correct. Then we are sending the emails. Then we pass whatever output we have here. And it seems like our email was not successful. So it's interrupting the flow. We don't have an update here. So let's try one more time. Let's see what happens. Okay, so no email sent. Let's check in the previous run of the send email what's happening. Okay, so we are actually sending the email to from operations to, for example, okay, we have an error here, so this is important. We have invalid to header. We're requesting invalid to header. Okay, so it was my fault because I was mixing the attempts and the email. So the email was failing because I was trying to send an email to the max attempts value, which is 3. That doesn't make sense. But fortunately, I was able to fix it really quick by updating the variables correctly. And now we do have a new value for these 4 email addresses because we are now in the second attempt. So what will happen if we try one more time? This time we should be reaching the max attempt value, therefore we should be updating everything to stop, and that's where we finish our workflow lifecycle. Okay, so at this point, this is sending the emails. Then we get emails sent successfully this time. We are calculating the new value, which is again attempts plus 1, which is our incremental value, and checking if we have remaining attempts or not. And that's exactly the output that we wanted. We have 3 attempts because it matches the max attempts. Then we don't have remaining attempts anymore, and we are updating this to stop. So this is basically how this workflow has been designed to work. Again, you can create your own copy, both of the workflow and the spreadsheet. You can modify the templates, and then you can simply initiate this by clicking run, submit workflow after setting the max attempts, and the rest should be automated. Again, if you want this second step to run every day, then you need to create a timer trigger, and that's gonna make it so that you only need to trigger the initial contact and everything else is going to be automated. Some enhancements that you can consider for this workflow. Well, if you want, you could modify the send email flow so that depending on the current attempts, you could have different templates. Right now, we are using the same template for each follow-up, but you can change this. And you will check, you will have a filter here or a conditional saying, hey, if this is the second attempt, use this template. But if it is the third, then you're gonna use a different one. This will be modified or could be modified on this flow without affecting the behavior of the whole workflow. Okay, so that will be it. We have covered how to use the interface input or form, how to read from a Google Sheet spreadsheet, depending on our criteria, like by using filters. Also, how to use the email verifier, how to grab notes inside if-else conditionals, and then how to update those spreadsheets. So something else that is very important in this logic right here is how to invoke a subflow, which is what we are doing on the third one by invoking the send email workflow, but we're also doing that on the second one to call the follow-ups as well. Okay. As always, if you have any questions or if you want to simply share your feedback with us, you can send your messages to support@oppz.ai, and we're going to be checking that mailbox and replying to you as soon as possible. I hope this was very helpful for you guys, and then I hope to see you next week as well. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and see you soon.